What's up, everybody? Welcome to the CanesInSight Daily Podcast. Happy Friday, powered by Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. As always, my name is Danny Enriquez, D-Money. I'm here with Peter Ariz. We are live from Duffy's Tavern, back in business. We are open for business here at Duffy's, the home of Miami football. Now taking credit cards. You know what it is. You look at the walls. You see the history. It is the spot for Hurricane fans, for sports fans. They were rolling yesterday with NFL games. You want to take your family. You want to watch games. You want to enjoy history with also some great food and an updated menu with all the classics. Duffy's. I know it's Pete's home away from home. It's our home away from home. And love doing shows here, man, especially on a beautiful Friday. This place is going to be bumping. How you feeling, Pete?
Feeling good, man. Phenomenal. Friday before Bethune here. Nice to get a Saturday action. Obviously, it was awesome to get that primetime Sunday night game last week, but you want to be there when everyone else is playing on a Saturday. So as a fan, being able to watch football, all day, and then should be obviously a relatively stress-free is what we're expecting. Like you always say, D, we can overlook opponents. We aren't playing, but yeah, I think just excited for a nice full Saturday of football, and then as we'll get into here, being able to see a lot of the young guys that didn't really get extended looks last week. A lot of them maybe getting some action on special teams, but seeing more of them from scrimmage, getting certain guys the ball that maybe, again, in a game like last week, it's a little bit tighter, even though the ball was spread out pretty good. But, yeah, should be a nice opportunity for some guys to earn some reps going into USF.
TJ Preble asking, we're going to get that CanesInSight shirt. Just look down. You see that little shop down there. You click that, get to CanesInsight.myshopify.com. But you can see it right there under our videos. It should have all those items there. So just click in there. You can find, you got the old design, the new design. The CanesInsight's a little bigger on the new design. But all of those are available on the CanesInsight My Shopify shop, which you can see right under this video. Let's go ahead and click that. So yeah, Pete, a lot to talk about here.
It seems like you still have your voice lost from last week. Have you recovered? I'm a little concerned, man.
That was about like 7 podcasts ago, Canes Connection interview ago. We did storm sessions as well. So, but man, we're recovered. We're rolling. Got a nice club soda. Shout out to the staff here at Duffy's Tavern, our home away from home on Fridays. We got Lance Roffers in the building. Those who don't know, Hurricanes Vision on Twitter. If you read CanesInsight.com, 7.5 million posts and counting, you know exactly who I'm talking about. Famous for his breakdowns, play by play, technique by technique, leverage by leverage. I mean, the littlest details, he's putting those on and trying to educate Canes fans on what's going on in the game. Inside the game, Lance Roffers, love having him on. He is back by popular demand to break down the Notre Dame game, give some insights that are going to help us understand what's going on the rest of the season, right? From what happened in that game.
D, I'm going to just say before we bring him on, because we didn't talk about this before, I'm going to mute when he's talking, because if not, we'll get a feedback here. So I'm going to mute him. So Lance will bring you on. Welcome in.
How's it going, guys? Appreciate you guys having me on.
Doing awesome, man. So Lance, wanted to ask you, first of all, you did the whole breakdown on the website, 2 parts, super detailed. But I saw a couple consistent themes. One I'm going to ask you about in a second. But the first, holding. You seem to have a lot of opinions on holding and what is considered holding and what fans might consider holding. It seems to be a personal crucible of yours as you want to get out there. So explain to me what you're seeing misinterpreted about the holding rule.
Yeah, so a lot of times when you see a defender kind of rip through a gap, and think of like the arm under or the swim move, those kinds of moves in particular allow a defender to get to a half man, right? And a lot of times you'll see an offensive lineman have their arm up and on the back of a defender, and that's oftentimes when Twitter and other social media platforms, things like that, go a little crazy, hoping for holding calls, but that's actually perfectly legal. As long as you're engaged when that defender rips, the defender is making the decision to put himself in that position. And you can do what's called ride. You can actually continue to push and ride that person out. Your hands can get up above like what is typically considered, in phase of blocking with an individual, as well as you can, you can maybe hook just a little bit as a person's coming through and they get that arm under there and drive and do those things. So a lot of times, the Notre Dame fans on my feed were really talking about the officials the other direction, right? And saying they were biased towards Miami because they weren't calling holding on those calls and things along those lines. And I really wanted to make sure that I, while I had a platform, got my voice out there on what is and is not holding, and hopefully quiet the chatter some as we see those games, because it goes the other direction too, right? Whenever we see our players do some of those same moves and maybe an individual kind of hook them around the waist or ride them out of a play, that's allowed on the other side also. So.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Big Markel Bell was getting a lot of those calls on Twitter or whatever, people complaining about him, but it makes sense given what you're saying, that 6'8", 6'9", you're trying to rip and get under him, and if anyone's going to be riding people, it's going to be him with his length. Yep. You also talked about, before we get off the penalties, because I want to get into the football part of it, you were very detailed and clear with screenshots. I mean, it's hard to argue with what you were presenting. It was right there. Some of the no calls against Miami, as far as face mask and unsportsmanlike things that, look, if you're going to let them all slide, that's fine. But obviously we got hit with a pretty bad one ourselves, and you highlight a lot of those in your breakdown.
Yeah, I think in this particular one, maybe it irked me just a little bit more because of the opponent, right? Where the whole narrative is around Notre Dame's the white hat and Miami's the black hat in these matchups, right? And I wanted to kind of highlight the fact that in this particular case, it was actually quite the opposite, right? Where Notre Dame was really getting away with several things. The defensive pass interference and some of those things, those really are judgment calls, right? You can maybe call it here and not call it there, a lot of those things. But to me, two-hand grasping somebody's face mask and dragging them on their knees, that's not really a judgment call, right? That's pretty blatant. And then we had another time later on where one of the cornerbacks literally got up under the face mask of a wide receiver and grabbed and turned that. That seems pretty straightforward to me as well. And then on the very first third down of the game, right, where Xavier Lucas was right there to tackle Faison and get him off the field, the blocker literally turned his head and threw him completely off. And that's the only reason why that play worked. And I think that kind of set the tone for the fact that not a single one of those were called in the entire game. And the only team that got a personal foul penalty was actually Miami. And it was on David Blay on a punt return where he's running down the field and the coverage guy goes in front of him, right? And he puts his arm out just to kind of avoid as someone's coming across his legs, and he goes down, and they throw a personal foul on that, right? And it kind of irked me in the fact that none of those were called. And honestly, I don't see how you could push back on the fact that it was one-sided, but just based on the fact that, you saw the screenshots on the review.
Lance, one of the first things that you mentioned in your upon further review, which again, available on CanesInSight.com, always do a tremendous job with those. Notre in coverage. Everyone's talking about the play late in the game. You highlighted another play there early. The stuff that you saw there, correctable from his point of view. I mean, we saw what he was doing in terms of the tackling department, but is that something that you're concerned with moving forward?
Yeah, so even before, whenever he signed, right, that was one of the areas that you just kind of noticed with him, that he's a lot better going forward than he is going backwards, right? And that's typical of a player of that archetype, right, where he's a little bit better of a pass rusher. He's what I might describe as a thumper, an individual that's a little bit bigger and really likes to hit a little bit more than maybe an individual who's going to be a coverage player. There were a couple of things that I saw. One thing I want to talk about, and I highlighted in the review as well. During the live view, I thought Toure was responsible for the bust on the safety, right? The drive where Notre Dame kind of tied the game up late, and it looked like maybe he was the one that busted on that tight end. But really, that was on Jacoby Thomas based on the review. Toure was in man under zone, and he basically is carrying individuals through his zone, getting to a spot drop, right? So he's going to carry that seam route 10 to 12 yards, depending on what the coverage is. And then he's going to release that to that deep safety who's going to follow him up the hash. And in this particular case, Thomas didn't do that. Teray did his job, right? And so while I was mad during the game, when you do these reviews, you kind of maybe things change your opinion a little bit. So on that particular one, that was him. Another one, really, it's just about, having a little more confidence. I feel like he had an individual coming into his area and he was late to see it and get there. That happens, right?
So, Lance, so one of the things that you were critical of on the rewatch, obviously you're not out there bashing people, but you were just explaining what you're seeing on the film, was my guy Elijah Lofton and also Alex Bauman, the tight ends blocking a little bit. Now I've talked about how Lofton, sensational spring, was banged up in camp, really not where he was before at this point, but he's working his way up. I think I talked to a bunch of people down there today. I think they're really going to make a conscious effort to speed up his process and get him back to where he was and where they expect him to be. But you saw in the game on the rewatch, really both tight ends had a tough time with some of their wham blocks, their inline blocks, and that hurt our offense at times in the running game.
Yeah, I think I even sent you a text before I posted the review because I know, that's your guy a little bit, and maybe I wasn't the most kind on this. I think the one thing I want to say, of course, is none of this is personal, right? This is just what happened in that particular game. These things are fixable. Players are going to have great games. They're going to have less great games, right? In this particular game, Lofton really did struggle with all of the edge blocking that he was asked to do. So Miami in this particular game really employed a sniffer, which is just basically an offset blocker off of the hip of a tackle, right? And it's actually named for sniffer, just like you would think it would be, off someone's rear end. And then they slice across the line of scrimmage. Is basically just think of the guy as like going into motion after the snap, right? To be able to kick out or wham or just wedge block an individual edge. And in this particular game, Lofton had trouble with that. I don't know if there's a technique issue. There are definitely some technique issues in this game, or if it is the injury that you're talking about there. But this was not his best game in that regard. I also want to point out that, Notre Dame's guys are on scholarship too. And number 27 was an impressive player to me. I liked him a lot. He was an individual that was a linebacker for them, made plays as a linebacker. He split doubles. He got off blocks, and he also was real physical with Lofton. So, in that regard, you may not see an individual who's quite that talented in every game moving forward, but Lofton struggled in this one blocking. I thought Bauman was better, but not good, right? I feel like he also missed some blocks. And listen, on the last third down of the game, that was set up to be out the gate, right? That was set up to be, if not a touchdown, definitely down the line, down the sideline to get, 10-yard line or better and salt that game away. But Lofton and Bauman both, they had a combo block on the edge. In this particular case, it was 27 again. And we had Matthew McCoy, number 78, who was pulling around, and he was going to kick out that edge. Or force player. In this particular case, it was a safety who was dropping down. And if they get that block on the edge, it's a first down for certain. It was a 3rd and 4, right? It was a first down for certain if they just hold that block, and it's possibly a touchdown out the gate. So those are things that I'm confident the coaches are talking with those two players about and dreaming up better ways to, do better in the future, because we actually attacked the edges in our run game more in this particular game than we did last year. Last year, you even saw the graphic during the game that we were second in the country, right, on inside runs, a percentage that was well into the 80s. In this particular game, we attacked the edges, outside runs just a little bit more with Brown, but we had some busts on the outside. I can't hear you, so I'm not sure if it's me, but.
Yeah, sorry. So with the inline blocks, I think Lofton is always going to have some struggles with that just because of his length. The collision blocks last year, I thought he was way better than he was in this game. So that's why I think maybe the injury and some other stuff just kind of not clicking for him, because he's got to do better. This is supposed to be really a strength of his, is those on the move kind of collision blocks. He's very explosive, powerful. You saw that last year. It did not happen this year. I think some of it was, like you said, 27 was a stud. I think Notre Dame's linebackers in general, probably the best linebackers will play. I know Pitt has pretty acclaimed fast linebackers, but guys like, talk about the size and the speed and being well coached and being tough. This was a tough group. But Lance, on the rewatch, and you've talked about some of this stuff already, so let's say something besides what we talked about already. Did something surprise you? You always learn when you watch film. Something surprise you positively or negatively that you're like, oh, this is different than I thought, or this is more of what it looked on tape, or sorry, in person watching it. Like when you watched the replay, what jumped out as something you didn't think about on the initial watch from your couch?
Yeah, there were a ton of positives as well in this game, right? We've talked about a few maybe not so positive so far, but I think the depth in the secondary really positively surprised me. Ethan O'Connor played quite a bit more than I would have expected. Damari Brown really showed well. When you bring in 6 or 7 or however many transfer portal DBs that we brought in, you lose sight a little bit of maybe some of the guys who were there. But keep in mind, Damari Brown was, to me, a 5-star talent coming out of high school. I strongly really liked his tape when we got him. I actually liked him more than, the 5-star cornerback that we had committed that went to Colorado. Forget his name right now. But, I actually preferred Damari Brown's tape to him. So I've been hoping that the light will come on just a little bit there. And he was great in this game. He was physical. He was aware. He really was in phase, both in coverage and attacked moving forward. A lot better than I would have expected for him. Tony, I didn't have a lot of tape for him as a 17-year-old who reclassified. I was really encouraged with his route running as well as his strong hands. A lot of times some of these young players are so focused on the route that sometimes they forget about attacking the football. But the play that Tony made on that first touchdown, that is high level stuff where you flatten a route rather than drifting. I see so many wide receivers who continue drifting up the field and hoping for the ball to get to them instead of attacking the ball. To me, that is a wonderful trait for a wide receiver to have. I felt like he was further along than I would have expected in a first game, that atmosphere, that opponent. Tony was awesome. I really was encouraged with the depth on the offensive line. To me, Samson Okunlola even outplayed Matthew McCoy. Not that McCoy was bad. Keep in mind, if I say someone's good, that doesn't mean the other guy's bad. But I thought Samson outplayed McCoy. And to have that kind of competition is something that maybe I didn't anticipate there on the offensive line. That was great. Carson Beck was good. You really wanted to see him coming back from his injury. What did his arm look like? It was strong. I felt like it was probably a B game from Beck, to be quite honest with you. And we didn't even see his A game there. That was something that was good. David Blay, his physicality really popped on tape. You saw some plays where he wasn't responsible in the stat sheet, but he was responsible for the play being made by others just from the way that he was able to push the pocket. A lot of times Notre Dame was doing either guard tackle counters or guard H, think of like an offset tight end counters, and they were pulling individuals. And one of the keys to blow that play up is to have your nose tackle push that center into the backfield so that those pullers kind of have to bubble around them. And he did that more than once, and that'll blow that play up. That's something, if you think back to when North Carolina ran for 500 yards against Miami or whatever, that was their staple play, and we didn't have a guy in the middle that was able to push that center back. And in this particular game, David Blay really did. So that stood out to me. And then I really liked the physicality of Jacoby Thomas and Teray. I felt like having some of those punishers on the defensive side of the ball is something we didn't have last year. And players, offenses were able to get pretty comfortable with them. And then Keontae Scott really stood out. He's one of those individuals that I was excited for. I made a post maybe a month ago back about the fit that he had and how I felt like he was an underrated ad. So, of course, I had a vested interest in him playing well, and I thought he did in this particular game. Not perfect, but I thought he played well. So those were definitely some positives that more than offset some of the negatives that we've already talked about.
Lance, I think a big narrative after the game was the play calling, people kind of categorizing it at the end there as conservative. On rewatch, what were your thoughts on how the game was called offensively there, pretty much down the stretch for Miami? Obviously, there was a couple missed opportunities. Everyone keeps talking about, if Marty Brown doesn't slip, maybe things look different. Keelan Marion on the pass interference that he drew there, that wasn't necessarily a conservative play call. But as a whole, when you watch that back, what were your thoughts?
It's tough for me to criticize, right? I mean, Miami never trailed in this game, so keep that in mind, right? And you get into a stretch where things were really going against you, right? I felt like from maybe the the 7-minute mark of the third quarter to maybe the 10-minute mark of the fourth quarter, they really had some adversity and some things go against them in that stretch, right? Where, I felt like some questionable calls happened, as well as, some things that allowed Notre Dame to get back into the game. And oftentimes coaches, they revert to what they're comfortable with, right? Mario, whether you like it or don't like it, that's going to be a comfort zone of his, right? To play power football. I've also kind of brought up the fact that if we make some of those blocks on the edge, right, the play call is going to look a lot better, right? Because it's going to be either a long run or we're going to, continue to move the chains. I've already highlighted a 3rd and 4 play late in the game. Really, I think on the field goal drive, right, where that would have been out the gate. The same drive you already highlighted it as well. We took a deep shot to Mary. That's a touchdown if the Notre Dame guy doesn't tackle him. In college, that's a smart play because it's only 15 yards, right? It's not a spot foul like the NFL. But that's a touchdown if he doesn't do that. So you're attacking a little bit there. Now, my nature is a little more aggressive than what we showed in the fourth quarter as far as having the lead. But Notre Dame has great secondary. I feel like there were a couple of plays where it was like, that could have been a pick, or that could have gone the other direction. And that probably prompted the coaches to go into a shell a little bit. And so I think the long-winded way of saying that there's probably a little bit of, truth to the fact that they went conservative. But I also can't blame them based on the game flow and the way things were heading out because, they never trailed in the game.
Lance, so one of the cool things about this game being on Sunday is you got to watch everybody on Saturday. Some teams weren't really tested. Oregon, Georgia, they're going to be in the mix. But you got to see a pretty good cross-section of the top teams in the country, including the 2 teams that played on Sunday. So, my personal big takeaway, and I'm as homer as it gets, is this is the first time in a while that we actually, in my opinion, have a chance to win a national championship. Doesn't mean we're going to. These are the favorite. Obviously, we know a million things need to happen, especially with this 12-team playoff. We haven't even been to the playoff, haven't even won the ACC. But just seeing experienced quarterback, offensive line, physical running game that's hard to match up with, defensive line doing what they did against Notre Dame's offensive line, the secondary. It just seems like a lot of the pieces that traditionally will allow you to compete for championships and as well as just overall body types, I thought we stacked up pretty well with the other top teams. And just in general, I think parity, you don't see those great Alabama, Georgia teams of a few years ago where it's just hard to match up with for anybody. I know I'm a homer. You watch some of those games. Are you seeing a team that, I'm not saying is the favorite, I'm not saying any of these things. Are you seeing a team that has the chance, because of what they have from a veteran standpoint and a body type standpoint, to compete for a championship?
Yeah, at this point, and I watched a lot of football. We do a guys' weekend over Labor Day, and I was able to kind of sit and watch a lot of the games. It would be an upset if Miami's not in the playoffs. They are absolutely one of the 6-7 best teams that I saw around the country. Now, they were at home. That helps, and that atmosphere was wonderful. I think probably the big caveat for Miami being able to compete for national titles is they are going to be probably thinner up front than some other teams, especially on the defensive line, especially at defensive tackle. Imagine a David Blay injury that's a season ender, right? That can probably change your outlook quite a bit for this team just because we've got true freshmen, behind them on the depth chart. But in watching the teams, right, I watched the Texas-Ohio State game. I watched pretty much the Penn State game and just to kind of see what they looked like. And those teams are strong, but there was nothing that happened that made me think that Miami doesn't have the ability to compete for a national title this year because of some of the things that you talked about, right? To me, you've got to have a quarterback. There's no winning a national championship anymore without a quarterback in my mind. You've got to have an offensive line. You've got to have a defensive line that can stop the run without, having to put 8 in the box, right? To me, that is absolutely a precursor nowadays. And then you've got to have an ability on the outside to play man coverage because we see so much in college now, these teams, playing just a shell too deep, hoping that the offense makes a mistake. And that'll work against most opponents, right? But you get into those playoff games and those teams are going to make fewer mistakes. So you've got to be able to play man coverage. Last year, Miami could not. Last year, I never believed Miami was a national title contender. You and I talk a lot. You can vouch for that fact. You talked about you being the biggest homer, and maybe I'm the opposite of that just from some of my time following this team and being a little disappointed. I kind of have to see it. This is the first time I'm drinking the Kool-Aid in many, many years for this particular team. I also love the fact that we've got a power running game. In the pros, I'm not as big on the run game, but in college, that is still a factor, right? You still do have a physical advantage over your opponents in the college world, and having that physical run game is another thing that maybe I believe in more this year than what we've had in past years.
Yeah, I want to expand on that point because we talked about it offline, but you're a big pro guy. We're both Dolphins fans, and the pro we know is very much a quarterback-centered game. Now, you do have the Philadelphia Eagles who do such a good job on the offensive line and defensive line, and with running back now with Saquon Barkley, that maybe they're almost like a college team in the physical advantage they have over opponents. But in general, a lot of physical parity at the pro level, and quarterback is usually the difference maker. In college, what are some of the differences that you see in just roster construction? And because again, we talked about these things offline, so I want to bring some of it to this podcast. Like some of the differences you see in putting together the ideal college roster versus putting together the ideal pro roster, and some of the trade-offs, like, hey, this is just worth more, this might be worth less at different levels.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, right, is the offensive line. You have the ability in the college game to basically take your odds, your probabilities of a loss to almost zero in many of these games just by having that absolute domination on the offensive line, right? If you can just hand the ball off and get 7 yards a carry, 6 yards a carry in these games, and there's absolutely nothing the defense can do about it, that can happen at the college game. That does not happen at the pro game. I think, any NFL fans will tell you that just isn't the way it works at that level. So having that offensive line advantage in the college game sets a floor that, the Miami program hasn't had in a couple of decades, right? So that's something that you can definitely do at the college level that maybe you can't at some of the others. Then you've got defensive tackle. A defensive tackle in the college game, to me, is so valuable if you can get one of those absolute elite, defensive tackles that can wreck a game. Georgia and Alabama are the two programs that I consistently point to for that, where they've got 330-pound guys coming out their ears, or at least in the past they did, and the portals kind of helped to smooth that out a little bit. And we're starting to see Miami trying to get into that game. So those two areas are things that at the college game, you can just automatically have such an advantage over your opponent. And then in the running backs at the college level, you do have a wider distribution than what you have. Each time you go down a level, the running back impact and value rises exponentially. Like in high school, your best player is generally going to be your quarterback who runs, or a running back, right? Because you can have such an advantage there. At the college game, it's not quite to that level, but you can have a running back who is just better than everybody else, and that sets a floor for you as well. And then, of course, quarterback always helps.
I know you wanted to get into some baseball stuff with Lance. You want to do that now, or anything else?
Okay, well, so Lance, I'm gonna take you a little curveball because I want to talk baseball with you while I have you. I know I didn't put that on the prep sheet, but I've been dying to talk baseball. I occurred to me when you're on. I'm like, hey, I know you've been doing. You did a breakdown on the CanesInSight baseball board, the Ron Frazier Memorial board, about some of the transfers and basically our lineup. So I want to talk about baseball with you real quick. But first, before we get to that, just final thoughts. We got Bethune this week. Obviously, it's one of those games. But you follow recruiting pretty close, I know. Any players that you're looking forward to seeing in that live action, just to see what they've got in a Bethune game?
Yeah, I mean, I want to see Hayden Lowe, right? I've heard so much good things from around the program and from both of you as well about him. I want to see him just a little bit more. Got a chance to see Armando Blunt. I thought he was good in this game, but maybe he gets a chance to get a little more playing time. That would be fun. I want to see Bryce Fitzgerald a little bit more as well, another player that I've heard quite a bit basically you want to see what some of these young players have, right? you don't get a chance to see the Sunday night scrimmage for the players that are redshirting and didn't play in the games as much, right? And that would be a lot of fun. And if they'd broadcast that, I'd watch. But some of those would be fun. And basically, you want to see Samson a little bit more, maybe in this game as well. Some of the young guys, yeah. So